We've looked at a few of the Halo games, seeing how far we could get without walking, and while we have more Halos to go, it did get us thinking, what if we had to try to beat a Halo game without touching the ground? Yeah, Luke and I were kind of perplexed by this idea as well, as it's really out there, but it did bring up the conversation as to whether or not this is something that's even possible in any of the Halo games at all. And even though Halo Reach is on PC now, it wouldn't work out because the first levels in this field area. Halo 4 probably won't work because of level 2. We didn't want to do Halo 5 because it's boring, and of course Halo 3 literally just starts us off in the forest because Master Chief decided to throw himself on the ground like a child. Halo 1 was maybe a possibility, but it does have the level where Master Chief killed all of the Marines by not wearing his seatbelt and ping-ponging around in the dropship, crushing everyone, and we actually can't get too far on this level either without touching the ground. But then we turn to Halo 2, and maybe there's a chance here. So as always, Luke and I were off with a very loose set of rules that we had to plan out if we were going to make this challenge at least somewhat possible and fair. The main rule is we cannot touch the ground. The earthy substance is what we classify as the ground. Indoor buildings and anything that we would call the floor doesn't count. And if we can pretty much easily say what we're standing on as something other than the ground, like rocks or pillars, we're good to go. The ground is pretty much the only forbidden place to stand, and it's lava. We're also letting ourselves use skulls in this game. We're mostly utilizing the Sputnik and Bandana skull, which grants us unlimited ammo plus a little bit extra distance when jumping. We thought about using the feather skull, but we know how that went when we did the no walking thing, so we decided not to here. Also, when starting off the level, if we spawn on the ground, that's okay, but we have to immediately get off of the ground within our first movement. Also, if we fail a jump, we have to kill ourselves or reset to last checkpoint. First up though, we were on Cairo Station, which is not technically a level that has any ground on it since we're in a ship in outer space, so it was good here. We decided to practice our jumps a little bit because we're not really good at jumping, but the real test began when we got to the level outskirts because there's a lot of ground around here. Fortunately enough, in the early section, we paid attention to where the pavement tiles were to avoid touching the main section of the ground and got up to the buildings right away so we wouldn't be tempted to accidentally walk on ground-like substances, and we kind of just building hopped our way all the way down to the Hotel Zanzibar and made our way inside of the lobby, which was floor and not actual ground. After the hotel section, we used the railings to get a better sight as to what ground we'd be facing up next, but fortunately Luke took a risk and jumped on a ghost and did a kickflip without touching the ground and was able to get in the ghost and drive to the end of the level, thus clearing this level relatively easily. Honestly, we thought this would be one of the hardest levels in this entire run, and it actually was super easy, but the levels we thought would be really easy ended up being much harder as we went through this, and this challenge got way worse. Metropolis was up next, and we didn't have a lot of options as to where to go early on, and while we were fine with riding in ghosts, because of the Fred Flintstone dissertation of 04, obviously we can't drive vehicles because they're ground vehicles. We don't really know the logistics here really, but we just wanted the extra challenge, so we decided warthogs and any human ground vehicles are not eligible for this run. Only vehicles like ghosts, specters, and wraiths that float are able to be used on the no touching the ground run. Fortunately enough, with grenades, we were able to leap certain distances and make our way up the bridge, walking around onto the railing section. Now, we're unsure if this road should even count as the ground because it's technically a bridge and it's not touching the ground, and technically we think it'd be okay to walk on it, but for the sake of this run, we chose to avoid it just to be extra careful, even though it probably wouldn't rule out anything. Towards the end of the bridge, we were able to utilize ghosts, which, since they float, helps out a lot here, and going through the tunnel was really exciting until my ghost despawned, so Luke went ahead and I tried finding my own way, and it wasn't that fun. Later on in the level, I spawned on Luke, almost got stepped on by a scarab, so I was doing well, but Luke took the ghost with him all the way for style points to beat the level, and we were able to move on. Still haven't reached the levels that completely killed our aspirations just yet. Next would have been the Arbiter and the Oracle, but since these levels take place in this hanging structure, we wouldn't be touching the ground anyways, so we were good to skip these ones. And then, oh boy, we got to Delta Halo. And this level questioned everything that we ever thought was possible for a Halo game, because this one was pretty much impossible. Firstly, there was nowhere we really were able to go here that wasn't regular ground, but eventually we chose to go ahead and jump on the boulder close by the spawn. And if you're wanting to argue that rocks are in fact the ground, this isn't just a rock, it's a boulder. Fortunately enough, we're able to get up the hill a little bit, making progress by jumping boulder to boulder. And then I did some parkour in the trees, which finally got us into the temple area. But from there, we didn't really have any places that we could go. The little area we're supposed to walk through, the main pathway, has no trees, no rocks, just a ton of grass and ground. And of course, climbing up the mountainside of things would have still entailed us touching the ground there too, which really limited our possibilities. We tried climbing up the trees to see if there was anything else we could maybe jump to that would avoid the ground, but there weren't really any options that we could use here to get a little bit further in this run. We were stuck in this open area for a really long time, just trying to see what possibilities we could work with. Eventually, actually, some pelicans come along and drop off some warthogs for us, which literally shocked us. We had never seen this happen before because we usually just run straight through this level. But fortunately enough, with the pelicans, we had renewed hope that maybe there was a possibility that if we jumped on the pelicans, they could fly us to an area where maybe we could do another grenade jump and land on some sort of rock or tree that could at least get us a little bit further along. After some trial and error, we did make it onto the pelicans, but we weren't able to actually go anywhere that we could actually use for this run. We thought the pelicans were our salvation, but we just died in the process. But then we had to really start thinking technically, because honestly at this point in the run, there was literally nothing we could do to even slightly get further. There literally isn't anything else you can try on this level if you're going to try to do it without touching the ground. So ultimately, we were pretty much ready just to say that this level cannot be completed and just continue with the run and do the video that we would do if we had failed on any of our other types of challenges. But then we remembered one thing that could maybe save this run, and it's the fact that we were playing on the Master Chief Collection Halo 2 Anniversary Edition that 343 did not properly texture, and because of them not texturing things properly, we actually could exploit a visual glitch that would allow us to essentially walk on thin air. Essentially, we found one sliver of the mountainside that was not textured evenly with the underlying Halo 2 graphics, and essentially was textured underneath the actual height of the ground. So if you are playing in new graphics, while you are technically touching the ground in the old game engine, the new graphics don't appear that way, and technically you're floating while you're outside and up on the mountainside of the map. Sure, this definitely wasn't our plan going into this run to have to exploit things like this that could really be argued either way as to whether or not this would be legal in a run, but considering this would either end the entire video or give us a brand new challenge to try to work around and continue through this run, we thought the latter sounded a lot better, and it was a challenge in itself, navigating the upper level and having to check each other to make sure we never actually touched any of the ground on the upper level of the cliffs. And with how random and poorly this level is textured on the outside sections of this map, it is really chaotic. There were moments where we were completely inside of the ground, or we clipped through the map, which we weren't sure if that counted as touching the ground. We asked our lawyers and they said it was a gray area, so it's good enough for us. But after a ton of trial and error, we were able to find a route where we never touched the ground, and it kept us floating all the way through where we were able to potentially get ahead in the level. The problem is, at the next area, there is no way that the enemies will spawn without you going through the main section that we had to go through earlier. And if we don't hit all of the loading sections in the game and have all the enemies spawn in the right order, you actually can't complete the level. So instead, our strategy was for me to throw myself off of the cliff over to where the loading sequence will start, which allows the enemies to spawn, where I can respawn on Luke where he's in a safe area, not on the ground, and then we could progress through the level by hugging the outside mountainside top. However, after staying up in the mountains, we got way ahead in the level, and eventually we were able to find a section where we could drop into the outside temple area without falling falling to our death, which was a little difficult. But once again, since there's no enemies there, it means we hadn't hit the loading sequence that we needed to complete the level, so we would have to actually backtrack through the indoor temple area to make sure that we could cause the sequence to load again, which would pretty much involve us going all the way back to the part after the bridge where the Wraith typically spawns to get the next area of the game to load. So we still had a long way to go backwards in the level before we could begin to move forward again. We moved our way through the temple and we got to the area where there's this kind of water pond in the middle. This one was a little tricky because essentially we had to jump on the correct pillars that could get us close enough to jump back up onto the temple floor without touching the ground. There's essentially one specific route you can make, and if you do the grenade jump correctly, you can land close enough to the bottom of the pillar where you don't touch the ground, and then you can jump to the next pillar and then grenade jump your way up to the temple. I was the one that ended up doing this and Luke stayed back. I made my way all the way back to where the Wraiths typically spawn, where I was able to hijack a ghost. A ton of ghosts came, I took them out, and then Luke respawned on me and he grabbed a ghost too. And essentially we use these ghosts to drive through the rest of the level, just kind of wedging them through the tight doors we needed to. And we didn't want to lose those ghosts because these things literally were the key to salvation. And after spending way too long, multiple hours on this level, we were happy to finally have this one beat, despite us having to really come up with some trickery to get through it. On the level Regret, fortunately enough, all of this takes place on like Forerunner structures, so we were good here. We actually didn't have to do any of this level. And then we got to Sacred Icon, which was a level we actually thought we weren't gonna have to do for this run because it mostly takes place inside of a structure, but because of the end section of the level, we realized we'd have to play through the whole thing to see if it is in fact possible to trigger the end of the level, because there is a slight section with some ground. And honestly, we were quite surprised with actually how challenging this level ended up being. There was way more to think about than we had initially thought. Now, fortunately enough, coming out of the structure, there are a lot of different things that we can jump on, but the problem really is getting to the other side of the wall where there's the final firefight, which leads into the end of the level. Now, while with some careful platforming, we can grenade jump ourselves up to the wall, but once we get on the other side, there's no enemies over there, and essentially we can't trigger the final firefight sequence to begin, essentially meaning that we won't be able to beat the level. If we were going to beat this level without touching the ground, we have to find a way to trigger the loading sequence, which apparently only loads inside this small cave that has absolutely nothing we can jump on. Honestly, the only thing we could possibly think of was trying to launch Luke into the cave using grenades, hoping that it would trigger the loading sequence where then he could kill himself and respawn, similar to what we had to do on Delta Halo. But no matter how many times we tried this, we couldn't get it to work. So ultimately, after all of this, we thought we were actually stuck, until we realized that this level has the holy legendary boxes that are just sitting there waiting for us to come up with something to do with them on, and we definitely put these boxes to work. I shot at the boxes to try to get them lined up with the cave, and then I stood on some rocks, shooting the boxes to slowly rotate them and push them, where Luke would then jump on top of the box and stand on it, and I could push Luke while on the box into the cave, and I was actually able to trigger the enemies by doing this. Yeah, we were really relieved that these boxes were here, because this run would have easily been completely over had we not done this. Fortunately, the flood spawns in, and from there we just kind of waited it out for the firefight to end, and the sequence cutscene begins, beating this level and putting us onto Quarantine Zone, which was a little bit of an interesting experience in itself. Starting things off, I jumped onto the Spectre, and we rode through the first section of the level without too much of a problem. Now, there was a Wraith that definitely messed up our Spectre, but with a little trial and error, we were able to at least get in the structure and hug walls, avoiding the ground until we could actually get to the area where there's a floor and we could walk freely for a little bit. Then, after going through the indoor section of the crashed ship, there is this long hallway that doesn't have anything we can actually stand on. Now, one thing we did realize though is that if we take out this big sentinel looking thing, it actually drops a ton of debris, and if we punch or throw grenades at the debris, it could scatter across the snow, and we can actually stand on top of the debris from this specific enemy, even though it would be incredibly useful here because there's a section where we really wanted it to work, but we really couldn't justify using them. Now this big open area gives us a pretty big problem where there's another tunnel we'll have to go through, and these giant sentinel things, while they drop a ton of debris, they actually despawn too quick for us to actually come up with a strategy where we can use those to jump on. We had a flood come up to us with a sword and just launch us way up in the air because we had the Sputnik skull on. Things were getting pretty chaotic, and in retrospect, we realized it probably would have been better if we had just found ghosts and brought them with us from the earlier section of the level. So we actually called it quits on that and started over with ghosts this time. And actually going through the level with ghosts is way easier because you don't have to deal with doing the jumps on the pieces of debris. And we were able to clear pretty much everything in this section, except occasionally it would despawn a ghost if you loaded weird. So Luke ended up without a ghost. Rest in peace, Luke. But hey, he cleared some boxes for me so I could get by, and I appreciated that at least. From there, I just drove through the rest of the level, teleporting Luke to the gondola section, and this level was also beat without taking a single step on ground. Now, we normally would see some more Master Chief in the campaign, but since both his last two levels, Gravemind and High Charity, take place on High Charity, which is a big floating city in outer space, it's a giant planet ship looking thing, we actually don't have to worry about Master Chief touching the ground because he's just up there doing his own thing. We're moving on to the Arbiter story, which is all that really matters. Uprising actually turned out to be a really troublesome area to start off with this level because we're in this big cliff area and there's not a lot of things we could possibly jump on. Fortunately enough, there were some rocks that with a well-timed grenade jump we could launch ourselves over to stand on, and then from there we had to really pick out where we were going to try to go. Old graphics definitely helped me with this one a little bit because you can see the rocks a bit better. We jumped forward rock to rock, trying our best to just get as far as we could here. There is one section where you have to turn around the corner and there's literally no rocks you can jump on. So my strategy was to use a grenade and jump over the cliff wall, and there was a rock way on the other side that I actually eventually was able to land on, and we were able to continue to push up in this level. We then had to jump over this arch by grenade jumping as well to land on the rocks because it didn't seem very possible to fly under the arch. So that actually was pulled off decently. And then in the final area, we just jumped on this big boulder and grenade jumped up to the upper platform, landing on a rock, which gave us access to the indoor section of the level. Now, while some parts indoors do have Forerunner floor in it, some parts actually have ground floors, so we had to be really careful to make sure we didn't accidentally step on the ground. This big indoor section had a lot of different ways you could maneuver, and there's a lot of objects you could manipulate to get yourself a pathway to get to the end. Now, Luke's latency was really bad here because the Master Chief Collection still isn't working properly, even though the game came out back in 2014. So Luke's main strategy here was to call out where the main objects were that I could jump on if I didn't have visibility with them, and where I could move them to, so I could try to make grenade jumps to get through the room so Luke could kill himself and respawn on me. We got to the outside section of the level, and essentially we just jumped rock to rock all the way through the cliffside until we got to where the ghosts were, and we were finally able to cruise through the next section of this level. Now, after we got through the little river section, we did get a little bit lost, but fortunately enough, this friendly ghost here just showed us where to go, and we beat the level without too much of a problem. So honestly, all we have left is the great journey, and with how close Uprising came to us not being able to do it because we had to rely on these little pebbles, we were still a little bit nervous going to the indoor section of this level. Starting things off, I used a grenade jump and got in a Wraith at the start, and Luke used a Spectre, and we just used these vehicles to push up until we could get to the indoor section. And honestly, the inside part was really easy until we got to the part that had a cave hallway. So what we ended up doing though is we used the same trick as earlier to push through, where we utilized different types of objects in our vicinity like boxes, and would shoot at the boxes to make it easier to navigate through the hallway and get to the next area that had floor again. Honestly, we were surprised how smoothly this level ended up going, where there's just a ton of floor throughout throughout it, so we just kind of enjoyed a nice level that was more or less a normal level, and we got to the part with the Banshees, and we just were able to fly ahead to the end of the level, and we beat Halo 2 without touching the ground. Now, this one was really fun for us to go through and try, mostly because Halo 2 was the only game that theoretically we thought could be done, where we knew Halo 3, 1, 4, all of these other ones would be way harder to pull off if it was even possible, which most likely it wasn't. So it was cool that just in theory we're like, well, maybe Halo 2 could be pulled off, and we were able to actually do it. Sure, there were some very, very grim surprises along the way, like Delta Halo, and Sacred Icon was actually a really big surprise for a level we didn't think would be hard at all, but we were able to clear this, and we're feeling pretty achieved with what we've done here. We've done some really cool runs so far, and we're going to continue to make more content just like this. So if you do enjoy these videos, it means a lot if you guys subscribe with notifications on, so you guys don't miss when we do more challenges just like this one. All right, guys, that's it for today. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video, but first, make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at Rocket Elijah for me, or you can follow Luke at Rocket Sloth Luke. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video.